Hi, this is Pop. Thanks for tuning in. I thought I would introduce the assembly video with a little bit of context. That is, who's it for and who it isn't for. So it's not for DIYers or anybody with mechanical experience. This video isn't for you. You can head through the exits right now. It's okay. So for anybody who does want to go through the video, or perhaps is considering purchasing a Rad Power bike, you may want to see what's involved with this. So what I wanted to do with this video is speak to the people who are visual learners, for instance, who can look at a video and then just go assemble an e-bike. Then there are people who need the instructions. The instructions in this book are quite good. Where it breaks down, though, is that there's so many warnings and side notes, it sort of disrupts the flow and it's easy to get lost. So I thought with the instructions, a little bit of help from a video that you can stop and start, you might be able to get it done. And then there's also people who aren't very handy, perhaps don't have tools, or just lack confidence. So I only use the tools that come with the bike. Rad Power did a good job in packaging the bike. They included the tools, they included a decent manual. You can do this. You can do this with just these tools. It's really not that hard. And then the last point I want to make is feel free to marvel at the low production values of this video or anything I do. I'm new at it. I'm just learning. I might be an old guy, but I love technology. I love learning new things. So this is just another example. As far as an example goes, I show you my backside so often in this video. I should have had the Sunday funnies back there. You would have, at least you'd have something to laugh at. So I hope you find this useful. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. This is where we left the unboxed video you may have already seen. Knowing that I was going to be working alone, I thought I would lighten the load a little bit before I lifted up the front end by removing that 7.5-pound battery. I put it over on the mat just to make sure there wasn't any electrical contact with anything. So then I moved on to the handlebars. I simply position them in the cradle, and you have that, that piece that goes on the top. I just reached for it here. And there are 4 screws. You just put those in place. You get the handlebars centered within the stem, and you just go ahead and you put those 4 screws in. You tighten them in the X pattern, as is in the documentation. But what you might want to do is not tighten them all the way, because you may need to, and probably will need to, reposition the handlebars once you get the bike up on its feet. So what I did was I just left them slightly loose, just tight enough, so kind of in the snug position, just tight enough. Then connect those 2 green connectors, line up the arrows, push that together till you make a snug and waterproof fit, and then you're done with that and you can move on to the front wheel. So you remove that skewer from that plate that holds up the bike. That's the plate that the shipping is in the shipping container, and you take out that brake pad spacer, that little plastic wedge-shaped thing that holds the 2 brake pads apart. Get the front wheel, put the skewer in from the left. All of this is in the directions in the book. So you work from the left toward the right. You put on the conical spring, and then that thumb nut, I think they call it in the book. You just screw that on several times. You lift up the front of the bike. Wipe your hands on your pants, of course, because you just had grease on the skewer. Get that plate out of the way. First thing you want to do is get the brake disc positioned between the pads, and then once you do that, you can drop the front fork onto that skewer, which is actually the axle to the front wheel. Then you can go ahead and tighten that skewer handle. And then once it's tight, you push it back until it's very snug. Check that the wheel is centered within the fork. And then you can go to the kickstand and the bike is on both wheels. What I did was I noticed here that just taking off the packaging that the chain was jumping on the derailleur a bit, so I knew that it wasn't centered. So all I had to do was a couple of clicks on the gear selector. Here I'm just trying to see where the centering is on the derailleur. A couple of up clicks on the gear selector. Give the pedal another spin. See, it's still a little jumpy there. One more notch. And you're there. So you may want to check that on your bike just to make sure that you don't have any problems moving forward. So then you go onto the front fender. The manual says to pass it forward, but I found that just not right. So I did it from the front. That way the metal tab on the front fender was right into position. You didn't have to force the front fender underneath the arch of the fork. So this way it went on very easily for me. And I also had the 2 screws removed from those black P-clamps, they call it in the book, ahead of time, so I didn't have to do any of that while the front fender wasn't really secured. So I did that ahead of time. That seemed to be prove a little bit easier. So, and then you open up those 2 P-clamps. They're very flexible, but they're stiff, but they will go on. You won't break them. And once you do that, you can just put the 2 supplied screws back in. You can see them laying there to the right of the front wheel. So then you can move on to the headlight. This was pretty easy. It flopped around a little bit. This is where another pair of hands can come in handy. But again, the whole purpose of this is to show you that you can do this assembly with the tools that are given, and you can do it alone. It just takes some patience. This total video took 30 minutes. I'm sorry, this total assembly took 30 minutes. This is about a 10-minute or an 8-minute installation procedure that I've trimmed it down to, but it really only took 30 minutes from front to finish on this video. Excuse me, on the assembly. And you line up the 2 red connectors for the headlight. Now that you can see that it's in place, push those together and you're done. You can move on to the rear fender. You find the 2 supplied screws. You put them through the eyes on those 2 metal supports and into the frame. Just one note here that because the frame is powder coated, the powder coating gets into the threaded portion of the frame, so the 2 screws, once you put them through the eyelets there, go into the frame rather stiffly. Just make sure that they're straight and that they're perpendicular to the frame, and they will screw in. It's just a little difficult to screw in with a small Allen wrench due to the powder coating inside the threads, but it'll go. And you just tighten them up. And just making sure that everything is square, that the fender is positioned over the rear wheel and is centered underneath the fender, or is actually centered over the wheel. And you go on to the pedals. So both of them you turn forward. So I'm on the left side. It's a reverse thread. It's a counterclockwise thread. So as long as you take that pedal, the left pedal that is, and they're marked, which is which, and it says so in the booklet, you just turn them forward. Use the 15mm wrench and you can tighten them up. Now that's a very short wrench. It's hard to get these tight, but if you position the wrench in such a way, you can draw the wrench toward the pedal arm just by gripping it as though it were a pair of pliers. And that also prevents slipping off, or prevents the wrench from slipping off and you're hurting yourself. You'll see me do this here in a couple of seconds. So if you get that wrench again in the proper orientation, rather than just pushing on the wrench, you can squeeze it like a pair of pliers right there. It's a very effective way to tighten something like that without having a little small wrench slip off. Here I did, I held down the front brake, pushed the bike forward to make sure that the front brake was gripping. You see and then I did the same thing for the back brake, and I pulled it backwards. So knowing that both brakes work, you get to power the bike up. You can see the headlights on, tail lights on, and you see it blinking? That's because I'm pressing the front and rear brake levers, because both of those turn the brake light on. I just checked that, checking the suspension. And we're done. Thanks for watching.